Fine. Now let's come to the last part. All this is okay, but how do you? What do you do to promote and protect compliance, implement GMP in your work? Let's talk about that. I said earlier that there are only 4 things that can happen in your facility that can compromise safety, efficacy, or quality and place the patient at risk. Contamination, human errors, goof up, mix up, and the process. So let's look at each one of them individually and see how you could place your patient at risk. Contamination. Now, contamination compromises the purity of the product that you're offering. Now, that contamination could come from anywhere. It could come from your premises. It could come from your air conditioning. It can come from your water system. It could come from your gases. It could come from your equipment and moving parts, or the inability to clean your equipment properly. So there's cross-contamination. It could come from your raw materials. It could come from your process parameters that have gone out of control. It could come in your storage areas. It could come from ever so many places. But if your buildings are designed and maintained properly, your HVAC is designed correctly and maintained properly, if your water systems and gases and steam are all in a state of control and designed well and maintained well, if your equipment have been designed correctly, maintained correctly, if your raw materials have very strict impurity profiles for acceptance, your process is in a highly validated state and in a state of control, if all these elements that could have contributed to contamination have been addressed, now what could go wrong? In almost any industry, not just pharmaceutical industry, any industry where contamination is an area of concern, whenever contamination has occurred, failure investigation has invariably pointed out that 80% of the root cause has been the personnel. That is about any particulate, viable, non-viable, any contamination. But if you are talking about microbial contamination, be sure about it. When everything else has been qualified, designed appropriately, and maintained in a state of control, then almost without doubt, microbial contamination can come only from you. There have been other very trivial, careless things done. People who are formulators have opened API drums, white crystalline material, and they find human hair. They find gutka packets, pan parag packets, cigarette butts. Oh yes, there have been ever so many instances of careless operators in careless manufacturing environments who have done these trivial things. But contamination is not always so obvious. When it comes down to contamination, don't get carried away into believing that only sterile product manufacturers have to worry about contamination and others don't have to. No, not at all. Contamination compromises the purity claim that you're making. Now let me put it this way. Assuming you and your family go off to celebrate at some very good restaurant, and after discussing what is it that everybody wants, you order sweet corn soup. And you know that restaurant's very famous for its sweet corn soup. And the bearer brings it and keeps it on your table, and you call him and you say, "Hey, what is this?" And he says, "Sweet corn soup, sir, as you ordered." Say, "No, what is that thing in the center?" that black thing. And he says, oh, that's a fly. It comes free. We don't charge for that. You want more, I could give you. Do you think your appetite is gone? That's exactly what contamination is about. What the regulator is saying is, if there is something inside and it is not on your label, then don't you think it is misbranded? It should have been called sweet corn soup plus fly, not sweet corn soup. And if you had approved sweet corn soup with fly, then you wouldn't be complaining. So what has happened here is a case of misbranding. Now, if there is something in your product which is not there on the label, don't you think it is adulterated? Don't you think the sweet corn soup is adulterated? So, the meaning of misbranded and adulterated is just this. There is something that you have put there and it has come from you, which is not appearing on the label. You have put your product at risk, you have put the patient at risk. Now, at what level of risk you put varies from product to product. But the fact is, contamination comes from you and you placed the patient at risk. This topic is discussed in great detail in another DVD called Clean Room and You, where the target audience is usually the clean room operators. People who work in what you people call sterile rooms. And I've done it at length over there. Here I need not go into such great detail because this is a more generic audience. But contamination is still a major area of concern from you. What are you? A walking, talking, chemical, biological factory. And you're walking right inside and handling your product. You're within 18 inches from your product. Your hands reach the product, touch the product. Contamination is very much a possibility. Now, because you're a human being, there are something that are intrinsic to you. What is it? You are a reservoir of microorganisms. Microorganisms from every other source has been designed out of your facility. But you continue to be that source of microorganisms that could contaminate the product. Now your body skin, that skin is not a monolithic layer, it's not plastic. It is millions of small cells, skin cells. And these cells keep falling off and new cells are generated. So skin cells, now it's not just the cell itself. The skin cell has a lot of body oils on it. It has your sweat that has dried off, evaporated, left behind the salt residues. These are all there on that skin cell that is falling into your product. Now you have hair. Hair is not the only thing that is a source of contamination. Your scalp, the flakes from your scalp, dandruff. Now if you are applying oil on your hair, the salt residues on your hair, these are additional sources of contamination from personnel. The hair itself releases a protein called keratin. That is another area of concern, which is why we tell you to cover your hair. Then every time you speak or blink, there are saline droplets being released into the environment. Now, there are ever so many other secretions in the body, ever so many other discharges, and we are all familiar with the ladies who go through their menstrual cycles. And they, at that point of time, release heavy amount of contaminants into the environment. Then you have ailments. You have a cough, you have a cold, you have a boil, you have a wound. And on top of that, you have medicaments. You start sneezing. As if all this is not enough, you have people who smoke. when they breathe out, their exhalation is very high on particles, and it takes quite a while for them, from the time they last smoked, for their aerosol to steady down to an acceptable level. Even at steady state, their emissions are much higher than the non-smokers' emissions. Those who smoke are always advised to drink some water before you move into your workplace. Enough and more studies have been carried out to see what all kind of microorganisms are present in different parts of the body. But I'll give you one example. There was a company that was working and found Pseudomonas contamination in their batch. And they didn't know where that Pseudomonas could have possibly come, because everything else was in a state of control. So one microbiologist over there suggested that since Pseudomonas is a soil-borne bacteria, let's take swabs from operators' feet. So they took all the operators and swabbed their feet and identified the person who had some kind of an infection, and they were able to isolate him and they were able to identify the root cause. But this is an example of what actually happened. From that day, this company has part of its SOP that apart from swabs from the face and from the gowns, they also swab from the operators' soles. In addition to the biologic element, the intrinsic contaminants that are associated with you, there are ever so many other ways in which you bring in contamination. Every time you move, any agitation on your part, brisk movements, etc., like walking or moving your hands about or shaking your head, even your work-related activity, every movement increases the number of particles that you shed into the environment. Now, over and above that, if you start scratching, or there are some people who can't sit still, their legs will be moving, or something will be, they'll be drumming the work table. These nervous relief mechanisms also add to your problems. Now, the operator leaves home and then comes out and then probably takes a bus or an auto and then goes to the station and gets into a crowded train and then finally reaches the workplace. Can you imagine how much of soil he is carrying on his clothes, on his exposed body parts? These become additional sources of contamination. Then the very clothes that you wear, how clean are they? And the lint that comes out from your clothes, they also add to the contamination of the product. Over and above that, if you apply hair gels and if you apply cosmetics, talcum powder, makeup, they can increase risk of contamination of your product. You wear gloves, and if those gloves are not proper, then you could find a lot of those glove particles in your product. And the last case is where somebody goes and touches something and then comes and touches something else and transfers this material to this material, called transfer, cross-contamination induced by a person who has physically gone around. So, effectively speaking, there are ever so many ways in which contamination has been caused by human beings. So, how do you prevent such things, or at least minimize the risk of your introducing contamination into your product? First of all, high personal hygiene, which luckily in India, almost everybody is very high on personal hygiene. High personal hygiene. Then decontamination, thorough decontamination before you enter the critical area. The decontamination protocol should be adhered to as a religion. How do you decontaminate yourself before going into a temple? If work is worship, then your workplace is your temple. So treat it with the same level of personal cleanliness. Then if you have a gowning protocol, then make sure that the gowns are in good shape and usable, and that you go through the gowning protocol as you ought to go through. Don't do it just when a supervisor is watching you. You do it when nobody's watching you, and you do it well. If there is hand washing and gloving as part of your entry procedure, then make sure you do it well, do it religiously. Good conduct in process areas and always behaving with caution and vigilance. That's what is expected of you. If you can just do that much, be sure about it. You as a source, as an agent of contamination, that risk will be considerably reduced. The next one we will move into is the area I talked about earlier, the human errors, goof-ups and mix-ups. Now, if you are human, be sure about it. One day or the other, you're going to make a mistake. That is what is expected. And every inspector also knows that you're a human being. He only wants to know what systems and practices are in place to minimize any errors that you may commit. If you were to look at the history of product recalls, you will find worldwide 60% of the recalls have been because of human error. Now, where could human errors occur? In several areas. One is in weighing and dispensing. One is in sampling. One is in general handling. Non-adherence to SOPs. The marking and labeling errors. The packing and packaging errors. These are some of the most common areas where mistakes take place. Let me tell you about some of the instances that were brought to my notice so that you could learn from them. Weighing and dispensing. Now, 12.1 kgs of item A was to be weighed and charged. As per the SOP, a second person has to be present. So, two people were there. Now, instead of concentrating on their work, they were busy talking to each other. The person actually weighed 11.2 kgs, charged 11.2 kgs and wrote down 12.1 kgs, and the other person also signed the batch weight. There was another case, again weighing and dispensing, which was brought to my notice. The company, in its initial stages, the batch size was so small, they were making aluminium phosphate gel filter, and the process required aluminium oxide or alumina to be added to a phosphoric acid tank. And the amount at that time was less than 5 kgs, but the batch size grew. In the initial stages, the amount to be weighed was less than 5 kgs. The weighing balance remained the same, but the batch size had grown. And now the BMR was rewritten to say that you weigh 5 kgs and charge, weigh another 5 kgs and charge, weigh a third 5 kgs and charge, and then weigh 3 kgs and charge. That was what was written. Now, all of you know that you're supposed to be carrying your BMR with you, and as you do your job, after you do your job, you tick on the BMR directly. But all of you also know that most of you don't do that. You fill in your batch manufacturing record 15 minutes before the bus goes, sometimes 1 week before the inspector or auditor is coming. But that's not the way it is supposed to be done. Now here, this person did not carry the BMR to the workplace because it will get spoiled, it will get dirty, it will get soiled. He kept it in his room. He went over there and noted it down on a bus ticket, 5 kg, 5 kg, 5 kg, 3 kg. And he came here, and then his SOP required a second person to be present. So he rang up that second person who said, "You start the work, I'm coming," and he never came. This fellow couldn't wait, so he decided to go ahead and weigh and charge. Now, at least what you should do is, even if it is a bus ticket, you do the job and then tick. No, this person ticked all, he's looked at it, understood it, he ticked everything, folded the bus ticket, put it in his pocket. He weighed 5 kgs and charged, weighed another 5 kgs and charged. And then he got distracted because somebody yelled out his name and said, "There's a phone call for you." So he went to attend that phone call. By the time he came back, he had forgotten how many kgs he had charged. He assumed that all 5 kg had been over. Now there was only 3 kgs to be weighed. So he weighed 3 kgs and charged. The pH never came down, and the process went on indefinitely, and the batch got ruined. Now, when you have contract workers working with you, there's one more problem. One day one fellow comes and next day the contractor sends somebody else. You don't know whom to train and how much to train. Most of the contract worker employees who come as helpers, they have done maybe the 10th standard, maybe they've done the 12th standard, and maybe they've done it in their vernacular, their local language. But your labels are all in English. Now here was a case where one such contract worker was told to go from the production store and bring a certain drum, and the name was mentioned. It started with P. And your names are not simple names, they are fairly complex names. So this fellow is gone there unaccompanied by anybody. He goes there and the lighting in that area is not very good, it's a night shift. And he goes across and says papa and finds something, and he sees one P over there, brings it out thinking this is the material. Nobody cross-checks it because both the drums that were there carried the same kind of material, white amorphous powder. And so nobody checked it. They took it into production and the batch failed. There is yet another instance where two different materials, glycerol monostearate and glycerol distearate, came from the same manufacturer together. And because both were ordered and both were needed for different processes. The QC took samples, QC tested and approved the material, and when they went down over there, the labels that had to be applied, somebody was careless and there was a mix-up. All the GMS labels went on the GDS drums and all the GDS labels went on the GMS drums. And both of them again are white amorphous powders. And the store person, when he was issuing, he checked the name and label, and the production person also checked and verified the label, and the material was dispensed and batch failed. There was a case where one company was making two different products as contract manufacturer. One was a vitamin and one was a very strong antibiotic. To distinguish the two, QA had already agreed that this was a sterile product, and they said, okay, fine, what you do is for the vitamin you have white label and the aluminium cap will be white in color, and for the antibiotic let's keep it red so that anybody can see the difference between the two. So the labels were supposed to be red and the cap was supposed to be red. Now when they do production like this, it's not at the end of the batch that somebody does testing. They have in-process testing. So the batch starts at 3 o'clock, at 4:30 there is a QC sample, at 6 o'clock there's a QC sample, at 7:30 there's a QC sample, 3 times. And yet, when it reached visual inspection, somebody pointed out over there, if this is supposed to be an antibiotic, why is it having a white cap? The whole batch went down the drain. There was another case where material went right up to, there were samples drawn again in 4:30, 6 and 7:30, etc., etc. And nobody had noticed. It went into the packing department, where some contract worker, a girl, called her supervisor and said, "Madam, according to the batch packaging record, this is the batch number, but look at what is printed over here." And that whole batch also sat down. There was yet another case where some material had to be taken in for packaging, and the supervisor in packaging, they have an SOP in place where no material can be transferred from production area into packaging area without a proper issue from production and a proper receipt from packaging. All those documents and SOPs are very much in play, but what actually happened was the supervisor in the packaging department asked a contract worker to go and bring those white tablets that are there, those drums. There are 3 drums you will find, bring those 3 drums over here, and the man went across and brought those 3 drums. And the packaging operation started. Halfway through that, some lady in the line just picked up a tablet and just smelt it and found something wrong. So she called the supervisor and asked him, sir, this seems to be the tablet that we are packaging, but just smell it, doesn't it smell odd? So the supervisor then woke up and smelled it and asked the contractor, where did you get this from? He said, from the production area. So he went running to the production area and found there were another three drums which also had white tablets, which were to be packaged. But this person, having gone there and saw the first drum of white tablets, and happened to be coincidentally 3, he thought this was it and he came out. Now these are all the errors that have actually happened in the industry. These are not things I am making up. These are what people have come and shared with me. It is not only the Brazilian company that sent out a contraceptive with a placebo. One of our own companies, one of the better companies in our country, exported a consignment and had to hastily recall it because they realized that the consignment has gone with the placebo instead of the active. So these are the goof-ups and mix-ups that can happen even when you are operating. So you've got to be careful. Now what can you do? You see, you have to remain competent. You have to be vigilant. You have to be conscientious. You have to be alert. If you have, first you insist on written SOPs for your job and then strictly follow the SOPs in your work. Whenever you're in doubt, don't guess. Go immediately seek help from your supervisor. And remember one thing, whatever you do, document it. Have it cross-checked if necessary and record it. Do whatever recording you're doing at the time when you're doing your work, not 15 minutes before the bus comes. Do what you write and write what you do. Don't do what you don't write and don't write what you don't do. But if you can do this much, I assure you, there's not likely to be too much of a risk to the patient coming from you vis-a-vis goof up or mix up. Now lastly, what do we have? We have the process. Now if it is a validated process, how can it fail? It can fail only if the equipment is broken down or there is something else that has happened, or if you have not followed your SOP. As I have given you examples. The batch manufacturing record says weigh 5, charge 5, weigh 5, charge 5, weigh 5, charge 5, weigh 3, charge 3. And you don't adhere to the SOPs, then you have vitiated the entire process and placed the patient at risk. If the product had gone out, what would have happened? Please remember one thing. I was talking about Evans Medical and they had Klebsiella contamination that killed people at Plymouth Hospital. Now if you read the entire incident, you'll find one thing. This batch was produced on the 6th of April and it was released on the 20th of April, 1971. The deaths occurred in February 23rd to March 10th, in that period, in 1972. But the batch was produced in 1971 on the 6th of April. On the 1st of April, the operator who was handling the autoclaves went to his supervisor and said, "Sir, the temperature recorder in autoclave number 4 does not seem to be working." So his supervisor said, "Okay, I'll call engineering." He said, "Sir, I am writing it in the log book, please sign it." That fellow says, "All this is not necessary." He says, "No, please, I just want to know that I have told you." He got it signed. Nothing happened. On the 4th of April, he went back to the supervisor and told him, "Sir, I told you 3 days ago that temperature recorder is not malfunctioning. Nothing has happened. The engineering people still have not come. I'm bringing this to your notice again." He says, "Okay, I'll call them." He says, "No, I'm writing it again in the logbook. I want you to sign this." He made that man sign it. Then on the 6th, the batch failed. Then there was this investigation by Mr. Clothier. That supervisor was penalized, his manager was penalized severely. But this operator was commended for his diligence and his sense of responsibility and commitment to his work. Please remember, we all want that kind of commitment from you and your colleagues, and nothing can go wrong. Lastly, I have a suggestion. Write down all things you do in your job to protect and promote GMP and reduce risk to the patient. Just list it down. What all you are doing in your job to protect and promote GMP and reduce risk to the patient. List all things in your job that are critical to the product and patient, so that you pay extra attention to those that are particularly critical. List those activities in your job, if done carelessly, could harm the patient. Note down, if you were not to do this, then what would happen to that patient? Also, one more thing. Is there a better way to do your job? If yes, don't immediately start doing it that way. Speak with your supervisor and get him to initiate change control. Remember one thing, don't underestimate yourself. A great idea can come from anyone, anywhere, anytime. I wish you all the best.